A man sits in front of a machine covered in switches. Behind a wall, a stranger he met an hour ago is screaming, begging him to stop, saying his heart can't take it. And a calm voice beside him just says, "Please continue." Most people are sure they know what happens next. This is the Milgram experiment, and almost everything you've heard about it is wrong. The famous version says it proved something dark about all of us. The truth is stranger and, honestly, a little more hopeful. Here's the story you've probably heard. In the 1960s, a psychologist put ordinary people in a room and told them to deliver electric shocks to a stranger. Not little ones. Shocks that climbed all the way up to a switch marked with nothing but 3 X's. And the finding that made it legendary was this: 65% of them went all the way. Ordinary, decent people, teachers, salesmen, engineers. 2 out of every 3 willing to hurt a screaming stranger to the very end because a man in a lab coat told them to. That single number became one of the darkest ideas in all of psychology. Proof, people said, that any of us could become a monster if the right voice gave the order. Stanley Milgram wasn't chasing a party trick. He began his study at Yale in 1961, and the question underneath it was the one haunting the whole world at that moment. The trials of the men who had run the Nazi death camps were in the news, and their defense was always the same 3 words: just following orders. Milgram wanted to know if that could possibly be enough. Were those men uniquely evil, or is ordinary obedience so strong that it could turn almost anyone into an instrument of cruelty? He built an experiment to find out. And to be clear, no one was ever actually harmed in it. But the people in that room didn't know that. It worked like this. You answer a newspaper ad offering $4.50 to help with a study on memory. You show up at a lab at Yale. There's a man in a grey coat running things, and another volunteer, a mild, friendly accountant named Mr. Wallace. You draw slips to see who's the teacher and who's the learner. It looks fair. It isn't. The draw is rigged, so you are always the teacher, and Mr. Wallace, who is really an actor, is always the learner. He's strapped into a chair in the next room with an electrode on his arm. He mentions, almost in passing, that he has a slight heart condition. Then the door closes. In front of you is a generator with 30 switches in a long row. They start at 15 volts, labeled slight shock, and climb in steps all the way to 450. The labels get worse as you go. Strong, intense, danger, severe shock. And then the final 2, past the point where language even bothers to warn you, marked only with 3 X's. Your job is simple. Every time Mr. Wallace gets a word wrong, you move up 1 switch and you shock him. 1 mistake, 1 step higher, 15 volts at a time, toward the end of the board. At first it's nothing, a grunt, but the voltage climbs. Around 120 volts, he's shouting that it really hurts. At 150, he wants out. He says his heart is starting to bother him, that he refuses to go on. "Get me out of here." And if you hesitate, if you turn to the man in the grey coat and ask whether you should stop, he doesn't grab you. He doesn't threaten you. He just says quietly, one of 4 things. Please continue. The experiment requires that you continue. It is absolutely essential that you continue. And finally, you have no other choice. You must go on. Keep that last one in mind. It matters more than anything else in this story. Past 300 volts, Mr. Wallace pounds on the wall, and then something worse than screaming. He goes completely silent. He stops answering at all. As far as the teacher knows, the man next door has passed out, or worse, and the grey coat still says, "No answer counts as a wrong answer. Keep going." Before Milgram ran any of this, he asked psychiatrists to predict what people would do. They were certain. Maybe 1 person in 1,000 would be disturbed enough to go all the way to the end. 1 in 1,000. Instead, in that first version of the study, 65% of people did. Not 1 in 1,000. 2 in 3. That is the number that went around the world. And this is exactly where the famous story stops. 65%. Humans obey. Case closed. But Milgram didn't run this once. He ran it more than 20 different ways, changing 1 piece at a time, and when you line those versions up, the tidy story falls apart. Because obedience didn't hold steady at 65%. It swung wildly, from over 90% all the way down to 0. based on nothing about the person and everything about the room they were standing in. Move the learner close enough to see his face, obedience drops. Have the man in charge give his orders over the phone instead of at your shoulder, it caves in to about 1 in 5. The willingness to hurt someone was never a fixed fact of human nature. It was a dial, and the situation was turning it. Which raises an obvious question. If it's the situation, then what exactly was doing the work? Everyone assumed it was the order, the command, authority saying do this, and the small person obeying. But years later, researchers went back and did something Milgram's fans never bothered to. They listened closely to the actual recordings. They tracked which of those 4 lines the experimenter really used and what happened in the seconds right after each one. And what they found quietly turns the whole legend inside out. Remember the 4th line. You have no other choice, you must go on. It's the only one that's a true order. The other 3 are appeals. Please continue is a request. The experiment requires it is a reason. But you have no other choice, that's a command. And here is the part almost no one knows. Of the people who were pushed all the way to that 4th line, that direct order, 9 out of 10 stopped. Immediately. One man's reply is the best line in the whole archive. Told he had no choice, he looked at the experimenter and said, "Everybody's got a choice, mate." The single most authoritative, order-shaped sentence in the entire study was the one that reliably made people quit. Which means the popular version, people mindlessly obeying orders, has it almost exactly backwards. So what were the obedient ones responding to, if not the order? The best answer we have is uncomfortable, because it's so ordinary. They weren't surrendering to authority, they were signing up for a cause. The line that actually kept people going wasn't the command, it was the experiment requires that you continue. Not do as you're told, but this matters, we're doing something important together, and I need you with me. People didn't shock a stranger because they were forced to. They did it because they'd been convinced they were part of something worthwhile. And the ones most likely to stop weren't the toughest or the most defiant. They were the ones who kept picturing the man behind the wall instead of the science in front of them. And that cuts both ways, which is the hopeful part. If the situation can push an ordinary person toward cruelty, the situation can pull them back just as easily. In one version, Milgram simply added 2 more teachers, secretly actors, who refused to go on. Just 2 ordinary people saying, "No, I won't do this." Obedience fell off a cliff. 90% of people refused right alongside them. One shared voice of dissent was enough. Now, none of this is as clean as a single statistic makes it sound. Milgram's methods were messier than the legend admits. He improvised. Some participants suspected the shocks weren't real. And that famous 65% was really just one setup among many. But when careful researchers reran a version of it decades later, they landed almost exactly where Milgram had. So the core of it is real. We are extraordinarily sensitive to the room we happen to be standing in. So go back to that man at the machine. Finger resting on a switch, a stranger begging behind the wall. For 60 years we've looked at him and asked what was broken inside him. But that was always the wrong question. Nothing was broken. He was an ordinary person who'd been made to feel he was part of something important, with no one in the room to tell him he was allowed to stop. What would have freed him wasn't more willpower or a stronger character. It was one other person standing beside him saying, "We don't have to do this." That's the real lesson of the Milgram experiment. Not that we blindly obey, but that most of us are quietly waiting for permission to say no. And sometimes the bravest thing you can be is the first one to say it. So somebody else can too. If you got something out of this, subscribing is genuinely the only reason a small channel like this one gets to keep making them. I'll see you in the next one.